Hey guys, this is Dr. Hayes again, and this is the video for the Picturebooks timeline part 1. So I'm going to start with the very first picture book back in 1922, and then we're going to go up through hopefully the 1960s on this video, and then I will switch to another video for the second half. Okay, so we're going to start with this book. It's called The Velveteen Rabbit. Hopefully you can see it and it looks right. It looks backwards on my screen, so hopefully that's not how it looks on your screen. But The Velveteen Rabbit was by Marjorie Williams, and I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's about a little rabbit toy that his boy gets scarlet fever, and the little rabbit has to go out to the burn pile because of the germs from the scarlet fever. But he survives, and so there's like a fairy who grants him, like, he comes to life and he goes on these adventures, and this fairy, because he's so good, grants him life to be a real rabbit. It's very sad, and because the little boy in it who was sick, and he loses his favorite rabbit, and it's but the rabbit was so loved, like his eyes falling out, and even with that, it's he still is kind in his heart. I actually have a little toy that's supposed to be a recreation of the Velveteen Rabbit from the book. He has these little sort of sunken in eyes, just like the rabbit does in the story. You can kind of see a little bit, like, his eyes, but this is supposed to be a recreation. But the reason why I bring up the Velveteen Rabbit is it's still what you'd call an illustrated book, where you have text on one side, trying to get the glare, and pictures on the other side. But it was getting real ready, ramping up for picture books, like we talked about in the last video, where it's one unit that works together. So Velveteen Rabbit's kind of the honorable mention as sort of an early picture book, but the very, very first official picture book, like one word picture book, like we talked about, was Millions of Cats. There's the Caldecott. Actually, no, this is a Newbery. This was a Newbery honor. The Caldecott hadn't been established yet, but this one got a Newbery honor. Newbery had only been, this was 1929. I think Newbery started in 1924, so this was only a few years into it. But let's see, Wanda Gag was the author, and you can kind of see, I'm hoping these aren't backwards when the video plays, but it might be. It's okay. You had illustrations, and the text sort of wove in with the illustrations. Still very rudimentary, it was black and white, but we were getting the first examples of where the text sort of matched and flowed with, and it was all together on one page, and worked together as a unit. So what Millions of Cats is now sort of recognized as the first picture book of what we'd call a picture book. Then after that, let's see, in the 1930s, I wanted to mention, I have some notes here. Oops, sorry. The Dick and Jane books started. I'm trying to get rid of the glare, really, so you can kind of see the Dick and Jane books, which are famous now. A lot of people grew up reading the Dick and Jane. They're a little outdated now, but they were teaching you how to read books. The Sally, and the main character's name is Dick. I have a book in my office that I didn't bring home, and I wish I had, but it's a whole collection of Dick and Jane. It's a big anthology, nice hardback anthology, and I got it at a garage sale, and somebody had meticulously gone through on the cover, the spine, and on every single page of this book that's like this thick, and had with a Sharpie turned the word Dick into Nick, made an N on every single D in the table of contents, every single little poem, everything. It changed. It's one of the favorite things I own, is this weird sort of edited version of Dick and Jane that's Nick and Jane, and it's very funny. But I left it in my office, so I can't I'll have to show you if I find it. I'll show you, or I'll post a picture in Discord, because I have a picture of it on my phone. So also, let's see, also in 1930, you might have seen this book, The Little Engine That Could. Waddy Piper picture books were still sort of early, but I was going to show you what I was talking about with the page turn. They weren't really doing it correctly yet. So this is where you'd start here and go across. The train is coming toward you, so it makes you kind of stop. Today we'd have the train going off the page, which would encourage you to turn over to the next page. And this one, the train is going off of the page we just came from. So they're still sort of figuring these things out whenever this book was like one of the earliest ones. So they hadn't really established the procedure yet. But this is what I want to show you, that you had pictures here, and then you have text underneath, and the page turn is very sort of off-putting because the train's going in the wrong direction from where you'd think it would be going, following the natural progression of the page. Now this one's done correctly, where you start here and the train looks like it's going across the page and off to the other side, so you want to follow it. You're inspired to follow it, and it's going in the right direction and going in the right direction, and you follow it to the next page. So this little engine, maybe it's on purpose. Maybe those other engines are the ones who were mean in the beginning, and they were going the wrong direction, and now the little engine that could is going in the right direction. So maybe it was on purpose, subconsciously. But anyway, that was 1930. 1931, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the character Babar. Babar was an elephant in Africa, very similar to Curious George, which we'll talk about, but this was before Curious George. But he was an elephant in Africa, and notice how he doesn't have any clothes on. And with Beatrix Potter, we talked about animals wearing clothes and sort of what that signifies. But hunters come and kill his family, and he's a baby. And so he's adopted by this little old lady, this well-to-do colonist, basically. She's a little colonial lady, and she adopts him and takes him to the city in South Africa, and she domesticates him. She treats him teaches him how to eat, shows him how to dress and get fit and to bathe, and he becomes sort of domesticated. He's getting an education here, you can see. He's becoming really fancy, and he eventually goes back to... see, these are the village he left. He goes back, and their leader had been poisoned. And so Babar, in the meantime, you'd see he's met a girl. He met another domesticated elephant named Celeste, and they get married, and they go back to his village. And they're so fancy and civilized that their village makes them the king and the queen of their village, and they become Kings Babar and Queen Celeste, and they rule over sort of the savage animals. Racially speaking, this is very problematic. Here's some pictures of the toys on the back. I actually have a Queen Celeste toy, a little stuffed animal. Babar was one of my favorites when I was growing up, and I watched it over and over and over, and because there was a cartoon, they made a cartoon of it, and they made some movies, and there were several of these stories. But maybe you can see how it's a little racially problematic, how the fancy white lady comes and takes in the savage orphan and domesticates him and educates him, and he goes back and is able to civilize his savage village or whatever. Yeah, it's a little bit troublesome, but 1931, they didn't really care about that kind of thing. But that's a very, very popular series. 1936, this is probably one you're familiar with, is Ferdinand, the bull who doesn't want to be a bull. He just wants to sniff flowers, right? He doesn't want to be mean and tough. He's just very gentle, right? And so they try to make him a bullfighter. I'm trying to find the sort of quintessential picture where he's just sniffing the flowers. But this one is the design is just very, Millions of Cats is very black and white with just some text, not very sort of complex, but the reason why it stands out is because the subject matter is very progressive. It's about a very masculine, virile character who doesn't want to be traditionally masculine. He's very gentle with animals, and a butterfly lands on his nose, and he sniffs flowers, and and so he sort of resists the role that society expects him to fulfill as the sort of big virile bull character. So subject-wise, Ferdinand by Munro Leaf is very sort of revolutionary, not artistically, but the character is a very revolutionary character. Then, let's see, 1939, then the sort of Caldecott honor book for that year was Madeline. Madeline is very famous, very beloved character. And it's a French boarding school. She's in boarding school. It's not an orphanage. A lot of people think it's an orphanage. But it is a boarding school. And they live in this little boarding school. Artistically, it's monochromatic, meaning it's black and white and yellow. Yellow is the only color. I lied. Most of the pictures are monochromatic, but there are some that have some color in them. Still sort of a very limited color palette. I remember mostly just yellow, but because most of the pictures look like this with just yellow, but there are a few spreads that have some green and blue in there. But anyway, what's interesting about this book is that the smallest character is Madeline, and she gets into adventures, but she ends up with appendicitis. She ends up very sick. And she's crying and crying. So she has to go, I'm trying to get to it. She has to go to the hospital. And she gets her appendix taken out. And it's all about sort of what happens while she's there. And the friends come and visit her. And, oh, here we go. She's all excited. I don't know if you can see that. She's showing them her scar. She's showing them her appendix scar. And they're all so, like, jealous. They want a cool appendix scar like she's got. So for the 1939, that was really cool. That was a really cool sort of character to have, who's like maimed, who's imperfect, and her friends like think it's so neat that she had her appendix out and that she has a scar. Which 1939 was the start of World War II. A lot of the readers and their families had come through World War I a couple decades before, and there were probably a lot of disfigured people in their lives. So this was like, an interesting way to process that. That same year was another famous book, Virginia Lee Burton, which we'll talk about her more in a minute. Mike Mulligan's Steam Shovel, and I just wanted to mention it because we'll talk about Virginia Lee Burton in a second for a different book she wrote, but this is kind of where she started, was the steam shovel, and her style is very iconic, and she was known for shaping the text to kind of match the pictures. We'll see it more, but like look at her. I don't know if you can see it, but the text is kind of, the text on this side mimics the image on this side, and she was sort of known for experimenting with text shape and integrating the shape of the text in around the illustrations, not just like picture text, or pictures and then text. She wove the text in and around the pictures. Virginia Lee Burton was known for that. So I wanted to mention her. 1941 was another famous book, Make Way for Ducklings, Robert McCloskey. Very beloved book, set in Boston. Lots of the scenes in the book are recognizable as being, part of the city in Boston. Like you can actually see these places in the park. But the whole thing centers around this family of ducks in the park, and they're trying to find a new place to live, and they waddle through the city, and it's all about this cop stopping traffic to help them through and find a new place. See, the cop is like helping them, and it's all monochromatic, it's all brown. But if you go there now, there's little bronze statues of this family of ducks in the park. Make Way for Ducklings. You can it's like a little art feature in the park, but this is one of the earliest examples we have of what would be considered fine art or like high art, like like this, for example. This is just gorgeous with the duck flying over the city, and this is like this is actually real places. This technique, this like sort of charcoal drawing it's high art, and it was in a kid's book, and so that's why this one was sort of very iconic for the time. It won the Caldecott Medal that year in 1941. It's the same year as Make Way for Ducklings, it was a big year, was Curious George, the first Curious George. So Curious George has an interesting story. The authors, H.A. Ray, his wife Margaret. H.A. was the husband, and then I think Margaret is her name. I forget. But his wife, him and his wife, they actually did them together, even though he got most of the credit. And oh, my phone's ringing. I don't know that number. It's not going to answer. They were Polish, and so they were escaping the Holocaust, and they had a bicycle. They each had bicycles, and they had all of their belongings on the pouches on the bicycles. And one of the things they had was the manuscript of Curious George, and they had it in. It wasn't published yet. It wasn't anything. It was something they were working on, and they had it in the bicycle rack thing. And they were stopped at the border and searched, but they were allowed to pass through, and they moved to America, immigrated to America, and in New York, I think. And then they published Curious George. So it was a very close call. We almost didn't have Curious George because if it had been confiscated, or if they hadn't been allowed to cross, who knows, we might not have had it. It also has, very similar to Babar, some sort of troubling racial issues where Curious George is a happy monkey in the jungle, and then the man in the yellow hat comes and tricks him. He puts his hat out to get him, and then once he's curious and he gets the hat, and then he traps him and puts him in a sack and takes him on his ship. So he basically kidnaps this savage native monkey and takes him back with him, and we have this thing where he's being civilized, right? He's learning how to eat and to wear clothes, and to he's smoking a pipe in that one picture, and so it's very sort of that he gets into all that kind of trouble because he doesn't belong there, right? So it shows him trying to be act like he's back home, but he's in New York, and so it just doesn't work. So there's some interesting problematic features, but some people, optimistic people, like to read it as if it is an immigrant story, because you could say that the Rays themselves, they didn't have a choice. They were sort of taken away from their home. They didn't have a choice about coming to America. It was their only option if they were going to survive. So you can read it more optimistically, like this was a way for them to work through their sort of being displaced from their home, because they sort of reworked Curious George and all before it was published, but it was this character that they left Poland with. They left with Curious George, and they had little antics that he was getting into, but it really became sort of a fish out of water, monkey out of jungle story after they moved. But yeah, that was the same year as Make Way for Ducklings, 1941. 1942, there's a couple things. The Little Golden Books series started. I don't know if you guys grew up reading Little Golden Books, but they're the ones that have the gold foil on the spine. And these are some of the classic ones. Pokey Little Puppy, Tawny Scrawny Lion. Is that the elephant? Baggy Saggy Elephant. Saggy Baggy Elephant. Toodle. Scruffy the Tugboat. Anyway, this is a classic collection that I found. It's like a reprint of classic ones, but I grew up reading these books. But the Little Golden Books started in 1942, and they were sort of the chapbook version of picture books. They were real cheaply made. They would be in the grocery store, on a rack or something, and families who didn't have as much income could afford these. They could afford a little book because they weren't that much money, and they weren't considered high quality, but they were crucial to the sort of exposure of children to the picture book genre and getting them that visual literacy and getting them used to it. So Little Golden Books, you still Echo has Little Golden Books that have the gold spine that have the Marvel characters or Frozen or something. I mean, they still make these little cheaper versions of picture book stories. But that same year, 1942, was when The Little House, Virginia Lee Burton, it was the Caldecott winner that year, and she's the one who did the Mike Mulligan steam shovel a while ago that I showed you. But this book traces the life of this house. And there's a few things that distinguish this book. I'm going to try to show you on the video if it'll show up. But the house, one of them is the text, where, as I show you, she's really good at making the text sort of flow in with the shape of the illustrations. She's really good at that. And also the house itself is personified. It looks kind of like it has a face, like there's a smile and the eyes, right? And then the scenery is another thing that's distinctive. Notice this, there's a horse, like a barn. There's a horse and wagon here. And as the years progress, you can kind of see the little characters, like she's got a little apron and dress, and the kids are getting on the buggy to go to school, right? And you can kind of see the rural and then the shape. Well, as it progresses, the plot of this is that development is happening. See more and more houses. She's not smiling quite as much. It's still very subtle, but there's cars now. There's more houses, and then the city starts building up around her, and she starts to get nervous. I say she because the house is personified in the story. And so then the little house is surrounded by the city, and she's kind of upset and scared. In this one, she's condemned. Like her windows are broken out, her door is boarded shut, and she's very sad. So they finally, long story short, she is transported. They move her to where she's out in the country, and she gets a new plot out in the country. See, and she's happy again. And something I wanted to point out about this last picture here is that, notice the kid is climbing the tree. There's a kid over here swinging. The house is happy. The man is working, but look what the wife is doing. She's just sitting under the tree drawing, right? She's not working. In all of the other pictures, I don't know if you noticed, the women were putting out laundry or taking care of the kids or, whatever. The women were working. And in this one, you have a wife who has leisure time. So a lot of people think this is a self-portrait. Virginia Lee Burton was an artist, and people think that this was like her sort of idyllic family portrait of her sitting outside drawing while her family is around her. So it is a very progressive way to paint a family, especially in 1942. That was a very progressive way to paint a family where the mother is being leisurely while the dad works and the kids are playing, sort of loosely supervised. So there's lots of stuff going on with Little House. I just love it. The next book I'm going to talk about is Goodnight Moon. I don't think I need to say a whole lot about this because everybody knows this book. Margaret Wise Brown. It's very popular. Margaret Wise Brown didn't do the pictures, though. Clement Hurd did the pictures, and they're known, this spread in particular, they're known for just being sort of garish. These like garish colors, bright images. They're very famous. But some people have noted it doesn't really look like a kid's room. Like, there's like this very elaborate telephone and clock on the nightstand, and very just sort of bare. There's not a lot. There's laundry there. There's a nanny in the corner. A lot of people, and look at the stuff on the mantle. It's very fancy. A lot of people have noted that the room in Goodnight Moon doesn't look like a kid's room, but it's an iconic book nonetheless. That was 1947. 1948, the Newbery Honor that year was Blueberries for Sal. I just mention it because I read this so much growing up. Like, all my teachers, it seemed, read it. But it's almost like a regression. It was an honor book, but the line drawings are very elaborate and very well done. But as far as experimental picture books goes, it's not that much. It's just pictures with like a little bit of text, right? Like, it's just very straightforward. So, and it's monochromatic. It's just black and white. Some editions of it have some blue as well mixed in, like this one on the cover. Anyway, I just think it's an interesting regression in art style, and so I wanted to mention it. I'm going to skip ahead. 1955 was when we had Harold and the Purple Crayon. And this is another monochromatic book. It's white and purple, not black and white, but black and purple, or white and purple. And it's all about a little boy, Harold, who goes to sleep and he's dreaming about all these adventures he has with his crayon, and everything he draws becomes real, and he interacts with it and is able to sort of create a whole world. And it talks about what all he creates and how his imagination just goes wild. And so the reason why this is significant is because it's one of the first examples we have of a child's sort of free play being represented in literature. He's not being taught something. He's not having regimented, supervised playtime. It's not like there's a game that's being written about. It's not like he's in school. This is what would happen if he had no supervision and no limitations. It's representing what a child's imagination would look like unsupervised and unfettered. And it was revolutionary, psychologically speaking, for the time. 1955. That was pretty early for us to be recognizing the interiority and the interior thought life of a child. We talked about this in class a little bit with Robert Louis Stevenson's Child's Garden of Verses, and how some of his poems, those were at the late 1800s, some of those poems were representing how children think about things that adults don't know about and don't need to know about because it's none of our business. This is one of the first visual representations of that idea of play. Lots of scholarship has been written now about representations of playtime and children's play and what they do with playing since then. I don't have my copy of Cat in the Hat because I left it at school, but 1957 is when Cat in the Hat. But we already had a presentation about Dr. Seuss, so I'm not worried about it. 1958 is when Paddington starts. So I have a few Paddington books, but Paddington Bear started in 1958. I actually have... Do I have it? Where did it go? Oh, did it fall? I don't know. I have a little Paddington... here he is. I have a Paddington Bear. He's usually in my office, but I grabbed him. I did remember to grab him. I actually got this Paddington Bear doll at Paddington Station in London, which is where he was found, and he was named after Paddington Station. And he's got the little tag on his neck that he came with that says, Darkest Peru to London, England, via Paddington Station. Please remove tag and save. It says it's for the toy, but that wasn't on there in the original in the book. Please look after this bear. Thank you. Like, that's what it says. That's from the book. And so a lot of us are familiar with the Paddington character because of the recent movies that have come out. But the Paddington book started in 1958. 1962 was a big year, because that's the year we got Ezra Jack Keats' Snowy Day. It was the Caldecott winner for that year, and it was revolutionary, again, for a lot of reasons. One was the illustration style. He used tissue paper. So I don't know if you can see, but what he did was he had different, like tissue paper that you'd wrap presents in, like that's real see-through, and he would layer it. You can kind of see the darker spots and the lighter spots because he would layer tissue, like different levels of tissue paper, and make them dark and light. And that's how he did a lot of the scenery in the book. You can kind of see with these footprints how there's like a little shadow. That was done with different layers of tissue paper. So the illustration style is unique. Something else that's unique about this story, I didn't mean to bury the lead under the illustration style, but the fact that he is African American. Peter is the very first African American protagonist represented in a picture book. Ezra Jack Keats is not African American. He's Jewish. So that's an interesting consideration. People have talked about, did Ezra Jack Keats have a right to be the one to introduce this black character? And this is not his only one. He has a bunch of books with this same family. Here's one. Let's see. Oh, here's another copy of Snowy Day. Peter's Chair. It's the same character. Whistle for Willy. That's Whistle for Willy. So he was kind of known for representing sort of this African-American characters and this African-American family. And he was himself Jewish, and it was in the 1960s. So there's some interesting stuff going on there. But this is another example of child's play. Like, it's showing him all out on his own. He's out in New York City exploring all on his own. And it's what he decides to do with it. And he makes snow angels. He's not in any danger. His family's not worried about him. There's a little bit of a problematic representation of this sort of mammy character when he comes home. But it's not too bad. But this, I wanted to show you, this spread right here is famous because it's showing after he's had his playtime outside, he comes in and it says he thought and he thought and he thought about them, his experiences, all the different sort of adventures he had. He thought and he thought and he thought. And we're not told what he thought about. We're not told, I mean, because it's none of our business. It's sort of the sanctity of a child's inner life. It's the sanctity of a child's interior thought process that, he has it. He has an interiority that is complex and rich and meaningful to him. And two, we don't deserve access to it as adults. Like, it's none of our business. So a lot of people sort of make a big deal about this spread and the accompanying he thought and he thought and he thought about him. But yeah, I can't go on and on enough about how important the snowy day is. We're almost done. So 1963, the next year, saw two biggies. Clifford, the big red dog, was introduced. Oh wait, I have to stop. I have a little toy of Peter from the snowy day. Look how cute he is. I can't stand it. It's one of my favorite things I own. Is this little, oh, he's so cute. Okay. Anyway, Clifford, the big red dog, was the character was introduced 1963. I have one of him too. I mention him because he's still so like iconic and prevalent. We still talk about him. Oh, look down here. I forgot I had this one. I have a little toy of Madeline too. I didn't show you her. A little French boarding school. She doesn't have an appendix scar. You can't check under her dress, but oh well. But also the same year as Clifford was Where the Wild Things Are, which is what won the Caldecott Medal that year, 1963. I could make a whole separate video about Where the Wild Things Are, and how important it is and how, much you can interpret it. But I won't go on and on like that, but there are a few things I want to point out. Maurice Sendak sort of famously didn't like children. Like, he wrote a lot of books for children, but he didn't write children. He came out as gay toward the end of his life, just a few years before he died. Not saying that the two went together, but he just wasn't a family man, wasn't, it was just interesting that he became such an iconic children's book author because his personal life, he didn't really have much to do with kids. So something I'll point out about this is that this book goes through a progression where you have a boy who's being bad, and he's got some issues that he's dealing with, and the picture is small and the text is beside it. The picture gradually gets bigger and bigger. I'm going to kind of go through this quickly. See how it's getting bigger as he's goes into his room, and then it gets a little bit bigger, and we see a little bit. This tree is starting to break out of the border of the square, and like over here a little bit it's breaking out as he's going to sleep, and then here it's breaking out even more. It's almost filling up the whole page and going over the edge. The next page, it is completely filled up on that page when he's fully immersed in his dream world. So it's like the layout of the book mimics him falling asleep and going into his dream world. And then the pictures start bleeding over onto this side as he's going to Where the Wild Things Are. It's even more over here as he's on his journey. Then it takes up the whole top of the page when he meets the wild things, and he's not scared of them. Whew. And then we have a couple pages where it's like, and it gets a little bit smaller down here because it's taking over more of the page. Then it is a few just full page spreads with no words whatsoever. It's the Wild Rumpus, because it says let the Wild Rumpus start. So here's the Wild Rumpus, where he's taming and tiring out and mastering the wild things. And then once he's done that, they get really sleepy, and then the text comes back. And then we're going to start seeing the images recede, where it gets even smaller. There's like more space. Then they recede back like they were before, like in the beginning when he was on the boat. It's going to come back even more to just the full page spread. Notice when he wakes up, he's not wild anymore, and his hat is back. So it's like showing him as a boy for the first time, right? And then we have the most famous line of probably any picture book, and it was still hot. People have that tattooed on them, and it was still hot. It is a textual representation of motherly love, because his mother sent him off to his room without supper because he was being so bad. And he went into his own little sort of private space, got his wildness out, and was able to come back, shed his animal nature, be sort of human again, and his supper is waiting there for him. And the fact that we're told on a page by itself with no picture, and it was still hot, is sort of this representation that his mother cared about him. She wanted to take care of him. He was able to return back to his life with no consequences, no time loss, no the relationship between him and his mother was not damaged. The picture of his last meal, the meal that's there on that last page, has a big old piece of chocolate cake along with the soup. And so it's like he even got dessert, right? So this is, from a mother's perspective, this is like this really touching sort of olive branch, this reconciliation of a child and a parent who, kind of had a fight, and the mom trying to make it right. So I really like it in that way. After that, we have another sort of gut-wrenching book, The Giving Tree, 1964. Like, I don't know if you've read this recently, maybe as a kid. As a mom, this book tears my heart out, because I'm sure you've all seen it, but the tree just gives and gives and gives and gives until there's nothing left. And the boy grows up and just takes and takes and takes, right, until there's nothing left, right? And then she's like, even when I'm a stump, you can sit on me if you're tired. And so it's sort of this, to the child reader, it's like, appreciate the parents in your life. Appreciate someone who's going to give and give and give. Just let me tell you, feminists hate this book. Feminists hate it because it's basically a representation of what's expected of a woman. Like, give of yourself, sacrifice, whatever your child wants, whatever your family needs, give. Think of yourself last, and then whatever you have left, they deserve it, right? And even just give until there's nothing left. This flies in the face of self-care, which is, the buzzword now. This tree is not given an opportunity to exercise self-care. Or she's not given the opportunity to set boundaries in place, right? So feminists are not super fans of this book, but a lot of mothers really love it, because mothers will be like, yeah, I would do that. I would give everything for my kid. I wouldn't, no questions asked. So, I mean, maybe in the Discord chat you can kind of debate whether you think it's good or bad as far as that goes. Just a couple more I wanted to mention for this video. We already had a presentation on Eric Carle, but I'll just mention Brown Bear, as we were told, in 1967 is when this premiered and Eric Carle became sort of on the scene, and then 1969, Hungry Caterpillar. So in the 60s is when Eric Carle emerged. 1968 is another one. This is the last one I'll mention for this video. It was Corduroy. I don't know if you guys ever read Corduroy, but it's about sort of a little stuffed animal who gets lost. And so I thought it would be a good place to end, because we started talking about Velveteen Rabbit, and we're ending talking about this teddy bear Corduroy, who's also lost and sort of goes on an adventure to get back to his child, right? So they're very similar in theme. This was 1967, Hungry Caterpillar was 1969. So on the next video, I know this has been long and I hope it even uploads properly. We'll see if it does. But on the next video, which I will upload in time to watch for Thursday, we'll start with 1970 and go forward with some of the sort of progress that has happened and some of the Caldecott winners and the art styles that have changed and subject matter that has changed from 1970 on through to modern till today. So thank you guys for bearing with me. I hope that you're able to watch this video and it's not too big and it'll let me upload it into Discord. I hope I can get it to you somehow. But I guess I will see you guys in the chat in Discord, and let me know if you have any questions or issues. And I also look forward to reading your reading responses about picture books. All right, until next time.